and thank you for joining us for this Venezuela Solidarity Campaign online briefing with our Secretary, Dr. Francisco Dominguez, on Venezuela, Latin America, Trump, and the coronavirus crisis. This meeting, it comes at an important time for Venezuela and Latin America and Caribbean, and of course the whole world. As the crisis hits Latin America, Donald Trump is ramping up sanctions further against the Venezuelan people in an attempt to bring about regime change. And the IMF has refused an emergency loan to Venezuela. The pandemic is also having enormous political implications across the whole of Latin America, including in Brazil, where far-right Bolsonaro's inaction is putting his presidency under question. So it's really important that we have this update and discussion tonight. This is the first time we've attempted a meeting like this, so I hope you'll bear with us if there are any glitches. The format is that there'll be an introduction from Francisco for about 20-25 minutes, and then we'll have some questions. I'll be asking some questions, and you can leave your suggested comments on the YouTube page, and they'll be looked at throughout the meeting, throughout the briefing. So thanks very much for being here, and over to you, Francisco.
Hi, evening everyone. Thanks very much for that invitation. This is an interesting opportunity to use this new technology that I'm not accustomed to. We want to make this as a conversation regarding the situation that particularly Venezuela faces. I think what dominates the situation between the United States and Venezuela, which is the crucial issue, is the Trump's administration desperation because of their inability to actually have tried just about everything for the last, I suppose, 6 years, including horrible sanctions, economic blockade, attempts to overthrow the government using every imaginable nasty method. And they have miserably failed, even though the consequences on the population of those actions, particularly the sanctions, have been terrible. I mean, we know from information we have that, experts from the Washington think tank, the Center for Economic and Policy Research, they indicated in April 2019 in a document they produced that between 2017 and 2018, as a result of Trump's sanctions on the people of Venezuela, 40,000 people died unnecessarily. Obviously, ever since, the situation has become substantially worse, and given that the Trump administration is tightening it up and intensifying the sanctions, including now sanctioning the airline of Venezuela, and even one of the companies, the Russian company that was negotiating and dealing with Venezuelan oil for the world market and so forth, that has also come under the sanction regimes of Trump. So therefore, the only conclusion we can draw is that this situation is desperate, and the worry is that the strategists in the State Department, Pentagon, White House, people such as Mike Pompeo, Mike Pence, Trump himself may not count too much in terms of strategy, but certainly he is the one who is going to be advised to make the decisions. People such as Alo Abrams, the National Endowment for Democracy, USAID, all the apparatus to intervene and bring about regime change, are really seeing the pandemic as a great opportunity to really now, they believe the government in Venezuela is going to be substantially, they hope, debilitated by the consequences of the pandemic, and therefore they're trying to go for it. Nevertheless, it's very interesting because without intending sounding triumphalist, the performance of the government regarding dealing with the pandemic, the Venezuelan government, is absolutely impressive. They've been able to contain the pandemic quite effectively. And the latest, because they apply, don't want to go into the details of what, the decisions you make, what actions you take, but they've been extremely rigorous, quite thorough, and they have mobilized absolutely every imaginable resource they have at the level of the state to ensure that they're able to actually contain the pandemic and deal with the cases right away. Let me tell you what they've been able to do. The number of cases to today, as informed officially by the government, is of people that have been contaminated, infected with the virus, is 166, which is quite a low figure. And out of that, 7 people have died. Most of the cases of death are, according to information, people who actually came from abroad, from Panama, from Spain, and so on. Nevertheless, it's 7. The number of people who have recovered are 65. And the number of people who are, undergoing some kind of treatment, hospitalization, and so on are as follows. 39 of them are in residential isolation. That is to say that in their own homes, being looked after by, health doctors, workers, and others. 24 of them are in center of endogenous development, which are the barrio adentro, the health mission that the government has, specially conditioned for this. And 15 of them are in hospitals, 13 of them are in private clinics, recuperating or being looked after, and then 2 of them are in hotels. So this picture actually is extremely impressive. There is no question about it, and they keep, insisting on the measures. And the reason for this is to have something called the Patria system, the system Patria. This is a system of registration of the population into a registration which gives them a QR code. And through this QR code, the government is able to streamline absolutely every benefit, as well as asking the questions regarding their health situation. And at the beginning of the declaration of the lockdown, let's call it that in the case of Venezuela, the number of people that registered was in the region of about 10 million to report back on their health situation, whether they thought they had symptoms similar to the coronavirus or not. And the government advised them that if they had 2 or 3 of the symptoms that were associated with the illness, then obviously they will report that immediately. But the point is that they immediately were visited by health workers. There are 20,000 Cuban doctors there, plus also other professionals and so forth. At the moment, the number of people who have registered doesn't mean to say that everybody who registers actually declares that they're ill, but by the number of them increasing all the time, some of them are actually able to, but the government is able to pick them up. And at the moment, the number of people who have registered is in the region of 17 million, which is nearly more than half of the population, which is extremely effective. And every time there is a new group of them who register, then the health officials go there immediately. Now, so therefore, this is going to continue, and it's very impressive, and it's very effective, very efficient, which means the following. This is leading the Trump administration to even more frustration, because they've expected, given the state of the economy, given the state of difficulties that they put Venezuela and their people and the government, because of the sanctions, they expected their performance to be substantially worse, so that they will be able to actually declare through international bodies, including with the support of the European Union and others, they will be able to declare, some sort of terrible humanitarian crisis was hitting Venezuela, and the international so-called community will have to do something about it, led by the United States. So this is the difficulty. Now it's interesting, because I want to deal with a couple of other things which actually have come up as a result of the evolution of the situation in Venezuela. Venezuela now says that it could face a humanitarian difficulty. Certainly, some people are facing humanitarian difficulties, and in consequence, the Venezuelan government has asked the IMF to give them, these resources, which is between 1 to 5 billion per country, in order for them to be able to actually use it to circumvent the sanctions, and then obviously use the resources on the people. What is interesting is this: when Venezuela was not facing a humanitarian crisis of any kind whatsoever, before, in the last 2-3 years, the media, not to name any guardians, were insisting literally every single day, together with the BBC, the Washington Post, New York Times, and all the rest of them, insisting that there was a terrible humanitarian crisis in Venezuela and there was the need to do something about it to help these poor people and so on. Now that there is a serious situation, because of the sanctions in particular, the Guardian, the BBC, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post are absolutely totally silent. This is totally disgusting in my view, and it should be highlighted because of the role of demonization and maligning that the media plays in the world regarding governments such as the one in Venezuela, but not exclusively. Now, the United States then began to resort to some nasty tactics. One of them was to say that the government of Venezuela was a kind of mafia-like government that was engaged in drug trafficking on a larger scale, and together with one section of the Colombian guerrillas, the FARC or the ELN, depending on who was speaking from the United States State Department, the government of Venezuela was prepared to use the crisis of the coronavirus, the crisis created by the coronavirus situation, to take the opportunity and inundate the United States with, huge amount of drugs, particularly cocaine. Now, this is absolutely extraordinary. I watched the whole presentation in the State Department by Trump and also the security cabinet, as it is called, and Barr, the specialist guy from the Justice Department, and a few others spoke. And what was extraordinary was not once in that very long presentation, which lasted about 1 hour and 40 minutes, not once Colombia was mentioned, not once, which is absolutely incredible. I give you the whole game away completely, but there is more to it. Number one, the Drug Enforcement Administration, which is the organization in charge of actually combating, from the point of the United States, drug trafficking at the level of the hemisphere as well as international, particularly coming to the United States, reckons that in their official report that 92% of the cocaine produced in Colombia is actually consumed in the United States, or 92% of the drug consumed in the United States come from Colombia, which is not identical, but it's quite similar. That is to say, most of the drugs that is produced in Colombia is consumed in the United States. That's number one. And number two, the Drug Enforcement Administration and a few other organizations internationally who monitor the situation claim correctly with irrefutable figures that between 75 to 85% of that drug gets it to the United States through the Pacific. Venezuela has no access to the Pacific. It has only access to the Atlantic. And then there is the actual situation, denounced by the Trump administration itself and by the Drug Enforcement Administration and a few other authorities in the United States, pinpointing to Honduras, the president of Honduras and his brother being involved in a large scale drug trafficking to the United States. And everybody, when you look at the specialists, they all point to Guatemala. Literally, the argument is all roads lead to Guatemala. So what is left in terms of the amount of drug that Venezuela is supposed to produce is very little, actually. So in other words, the claim is false. All these figures that I just have given are substantiated or backed or somehow confirmed by the United Nations Office on Drug and Crime, which produces an annual report every single time. And interestingly, this office has given Venezuela for 9 or 10 consecutive years a clean certification that there are no illegal cultivations that have taken place in Venezuela. So everything indicates that the United States is trying to use this as a justification for war. And therefore, they have decided that they're going to mobilize a fleet, which nobody knows exactly what the size of it is going to be, which is going to be deployed by the United States in the Caribbean, And it will include, according to some of the pronouncement, about 30 warships, helicopters, maybe submarines and so on. What is worrying about this? Not only the very fact that the United States is doing this, serious threat, which has a military connotation, a very serious one. The intention is to block Venezuela in every possible way, so nothing goes out and nothing comes in, with the justification of the drug control. But also there is a side way to this, which they gave away as well. The intention is to also block Cuba in that fashion. That is to say, this naval blockade, which is a physical military warlike blockade, it has the intention to block Venezuela completely, block Cuba as well, and prevent particularly the exchanges between Venezuela and Cuba. And their collaboration is absolutely crucial for the struggle against the pandemic that is going on now. So this is quite important. But what is the disgusting part of it is the hypocrisy of some of the Europeans. I don't want to blame them all on this. The United Kingdom, instead of using its resources and concentrating, as Trump should do, in fighting their own pandemics, the United Kingdom has actually sent a warship to contribute and to collaborate in this blockade, and so has France. So the United Kingdom and France have warships that they are sending. The description of them in the newspaper has been given. They're quite substantial warships. The one in France, according to the information, can carry up to between 4 to 30 helicopters and got cannons of every imaginable kind. This is the kind of things that are being done right in the middle of the pandemic that everybody is going through. Certainly, the United States now has become the epicenter with the worst possible rates of all the countries. In fact, according to the latest figures up to yesterday, the United States is responsible for about 25% of the total number of cases in the whole world. And the number of deaths is climbing up quite dramatically. So as the situation continues, obviously the Trump administration and those who want to bring about regime change in Venezuela are desperate. One little bit that I want to add to this. The United States has installed, nobody knows exactly, but it's between 7 to 10 military bases in Colombia. The intention is clearly to actually have a go at Venezuela. They were installed in 2009. And this was a result of an agreement between George W. Bush and Alvaro Uribe, somebody who was being closely associated with paramilitarism and settled with drug trafficking by just about everyone. Now, these 10 military bases are there to combat, ostensibly at least, to combat drug trafficking in the very country itself. Nevertheless, the DEA, in the last report, last year, reported an increase of cocaine production in Colombia between 30 to 40%. So clearly, these military bases are not there to combat drug trafficking, they're there for some other purpose. And it makes a mockery of their whole justification. So they began to face a lot of criticism as a result of this war mentality, a war drive against Venezuela. I mean, Venezuela said, we don't want a war, but if it comes to it, we're quite prepared to do it. So they produced something slightly different, which was a sort of different version of the same thing to bring about regime change, which is called Democratic Transition Framework for Venezuela, which is, officially in the website of the State Department and so on, where basically it says that Maduro and Juan Guaido should resign, get out of the way, allow the National Assembly controlled by Juan Guaido, which is totally fake and phony, to actually set up a Council of State to which all the powers, the constitutional powers that the president enjoys, according to the Venezuelan constitution in 1999, should be transferred to that Council of State. That Council of State should immediately expel or remove all the foreign forces, as they call them. In other words, all the 20,000 Cuban doctors are going to be expelled as a result of this proposal. Then, there are several proposals regarding purging the army and God knows what. And this will be extraordinary because they said these Council of State will have to organize elections. But these elections have to be supervised internationally, otherwise we will not accept it. That means clearly that the United States is using a different tactics. What was worrying about is the European Union, that although said, war is not a good idea, and they were mild about it, but certainly said they didn't like it. They said they will study the proposal of this democratic transition with interest, and they said later on that they will support it. Now, this has not been quite a firm position, but definitely is a formal position, which actually doesn't help the situation one little bit. And what has got the United States extremely worried is this. I think it's the most important worry that they have. Not only the good performance of the government, not only the fact that the economy has not collapsed, not only all of these things which I mentioned already, but the very fact that the Maduro government has entered into a serious agreement with a very substantial section of the opposition. And the new duly elected President of the National Assembly, Luis Flores Parra, is discussing with the government, there is a team of them from both sides, and they all, number one, condemn and reject any external interference in the internal affairs of Venezuela, which is very interesting. Number one, they are totally against the idea of, waging war, as Juan Guaido is calling for war against his own country. These group section of opposition are totally against. And, they're being extremely firm, very clear and so on. And they're preparing the ground, setting up even a new National Electoral Council that is going to give guarantees to all the parties that are going to participate to organize elections to the National Assembly. And that will be the last proxy, the last little bit of proxy, the threads of it that, the United States has with Juan Guaido. That will disappear completely and the situation will change quite qualitatively, quite dramatically, completely. So from that point of view, it seems to me that this is the thing that they want to ensure, that they do something dramatic, whatever it is. I'm not sure how far they're going to be prepared to go in order to stop, by whatever means, this election from taking place, because they know that after that, it's going to be literally impossible. The final point I want to make, if I have 1 minute, Chair, is this. It is crucial that not only we denounce, all of us who have even a little bit of an ounce of decency in our hearts, especially now that the whole humanity is suffering this terrible humanitarian crisis where thousands and thousands and thousands of people are dying. What is completely unacceptable morally, ethically, politically, in any possible way, is the fact that the United States keep maintaining and intensifying sanctions against many countries, particularly Venezuela, and we want everybody to join our voices to demand that they are lifted. This is absolutely essential that we do. And I want to give a list of the number of organizations that actually are, or individuals, who around the world have been demanding the same, although with different languages. First of all, there is Antonio Guterres. Excuse me, Antonio Guterres, General Secretary of the United Nations, who said very clearly he condemned the utilization of sanctions and she said they should be suspended for the period of the pandemic. Michelle Bachelet, the High Commissioner of the United Nations for Human Rights, who has been quite critical of the Venezuelan government on human rights, she also joined the voices and said totally clearly that this should be done. What is interesting from my point of view, even more so, is the very fact that Josep Borrell, who is the foreign minister of the European Union, Spanish himself, he has made 2 statements demanding that the United States, suspends the sanctions. The Grupo de Puebla, which is the Puebla group led by Mexico and Argentina in Latin America, plus an array of personalities, former President Lula and so on, are also demanding the same. And it's interesting that a group of 11 senators from the United States Senate wrote a letter to Pompeo and to the Treasury Department demanding exactly the same. And in the case of the senators from the United States, they demanded that the sanctions were lifted not only for Venezuela, but also for Cuba and for Iran. The Economic Commission for Latin America demanded that they were lifted. The UGT, which is one of the biggest trade union organizations in Spain, has also joined. And the foreign minister of Spain said that they should be done because And unless we're all safe, we're not safe, which is an excellent phrase, it seems to me, that she used to justify the thing. And then there's a huge community of lawyers, both in the United States, association of lawyers, professional ones, in the United States, but also in parts of Latin America and Central America and so on, that produced a joint letter demanding that this was done. And the World Council of Peace has also joined the chorus. As I speak, I know that more and more organizations internationally, trade unions, churches, and so on are joining the chorus that this should be done. The United States feels extremely uncomfortable with this, and it seems to me we should maximize the pressure, and we should maximize the pressure over here, particularly to say the UK government should not participate in these games. The warship should be recalled, and instead the government of the UK should also join the chorus and demand that the sanctions are lifted during the period of the pandemic, because they can see how the people of Britain are suffering. And I hope the comrades and friends and people of decency in France do exactly the same with France. If we were to be able to actually persuade that Europe does not participate, we'll be able to isolate the United States and show the real thing. So it is extremely important, and I finish with this, that we undertake this very seriously, because what is at stake is gigantic. If the United States is able to get away with what they want and wage war on any country that they dislike the government of in the context of the pandemic, imagine what they can do in any other context. So we're not defending only the national sovereignty of Venezuela and the people of Venezuela, we are defending the national sovereignty and the people of the whole world. So the whole world should agree with us. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Francisco. That's an excellent briefing. Okay, I'm just going to come back to you about one or two of the issues that you've raised. One question, first of all, going back to the beginning, you were talking about the way that Venezuela has coped with the virus. I was wondering if you could tell us whether there are any other restrictions, like on large gatherings or whatever, and also whether there's been any effect on supplies of food, the sort of things that we found here.
Yeah. What I know is that it started very mildly, but as soon as there was the first 7 cases, President Maduro went on national television and produced or instructed an almost complete lockdown. I know lockdown is not the best word, but almost immediately. And then next day, theaters, cinemas, restaurants, and so on were closed down. Obviously, no gathering of any kind whatsoever, certainly no demonstrations and so on. And then this was enforced, and this is the interesting part of the very fact that Venezuela has a socialist state, not a socialist state, a socialist state, because its society is very well organized on thousands and thousands of committees of every kind at every level. So, for example, the 20,000 doctors the 20,000 Cuban doctors that are there, they're part of the health mission called Barrio Adentro. They live in the most remote parts. They live in the residences, in the areas, in the communities that they look after themselves. They live there. So it's very easy for the health system to reach out to anybody. So all decisions, all restrictions, the amount cleaning markets at night, have video clips, which are absolutely fantastic. Workers in markets, in places where there was congregation of people during the day, were being fumigated with all sorts of stuff. Everybody was forced to wear a mask. You cannot go into the underground without a mask. You will not be allowed to go. Now they have to wear gloves, and the government took the decision to ensure that nobody had to pay anything. I mean, I don't want to exaggerate the point, but such as rent, such as electricity bills, such as water bills, or any other bill for 6 months. And the income of most of the public workers, and it was negotiating with the private sector, was also to ensure that the workers in the public sector actually did not lose income and did not lose their jobs. In fact, the number of jobs that have been lost is quite substantially smaller, although the crisis is the crisis compared to other places. And they keep tightening things up all the time, literally every single day. And what I like about it is the transparency of it. Either the president himself or the vice president, or the minister of communication, or the minister of culture. By the way, the minister of culture announced that all the museums, all the theaters, any cultural institution they have will be used for medical purposes if need be, and so forth. What I'm saying about transparency is the fact that every single day, the government gives the information regarding every detail, including in many cases the names of the people who have been discovered to be infected. They are visited immediately, and the whole family is tested. And the reason why the government can do this, because it's got tremendous capacity for testing. They have received, according to the information I have, more than 1 million rapid tests and more than 100, more complex tests. That is to say, given the size of the infected population at the moment, which is about 200, to have, several million, 1 million of rapid allows them to actually go everywhere very quickly indeed and detect any possible problem very quickly and deal with it. And because the health system was expanded so massively, and because the government, Maduro particularly, intensified and increased social expenditure from 64% 5 years ago to 76% now, it means that the resources, despite the difficulties, are there, and the club system, which is the system that distributes food for the poorest, is working and is available absolutely fine, and nobody's going hungry, which is quite interesting. And the moment somebody is, now that the streets are deserted and so on, and everybody is sort of inside, it's much easier to detect than before. So all of these food preparation, the preparation to actually distribute food, has allowed the government to have a very clear screen of detailed per person, per block, per street, per house, per family, literally in every possible, including there's how can you put it, their health sort of, complexion, because this has been reported already, and now there is more information. So it's very impressive, and they keep continuing. Now there are, in some states, governors are in the streets with the forces of law and order, soldiers, with the militia, with all sort of other, the communal council are in the motorways, stopping cars, checking everybody, make sure they have this machine that they check the temperature of people to know everybody inside, and then they fumigate every single car. Cars cannot come in, and there are places where they cannot travel from one place to another. So the idea Maduro was playing very clear is that for as long as we maintain the maximum amount of immobility, among the larger proportion of population, and secure that they are going to be okay in terms of food and attention and everything else, we will be able to actually, avoid the massive expansion of the curve as is happening in the other places where they put profit before people. In Venezuela, they put people before profit very clearly.
Okay, thanks very much. I want to move on now to the issue of the United States and regime change. You mentioned the naval fleet and how that's likely to be used to intensify the blockade, and you also mentioned the intimidation of the military bases outside Venezuela. This has been going on for quite a long time. It's not just a recent thing, but so how likely do you think it is now that Trump might actually launch a military attack on the country?
It's a difficult thing to answer without having intelligence information, and the government of Venezuela would not share that information with me, and certainly the United States government would not share it with me either. So I can go by what I can see, but my main answer is going to be from the point of view of politics, because it's the only thing I can do. I think the United States is doomed if it does, and it's doomed if it doesn't. This is what I mean by the two, sort of cliche phrases. If the United States goes for it, the level of defenses, militarily as well as in every other respect, which has been reported widely, this is not secret information, it's totally out there, everywhere. The government of Venezuela has ensured that everybody knows its capacities quite substantially. The level of resistance and the modernity and up-to-date equipment that they have makes the proposal of invading Venezuela a tall order even for the United States. quite substantial. And the reason why I say it's a total order, because it's not a question that, you know, Venezuela can defeat the United States militarily. There's no way that Venezuela can. But from the point of view of the United States, they were to go in, because it's a very, very big step. They need to win, and they need to win quickly. They need to have victories in about 48 hours, 24 hours, 3 days max. After that, the situation becomes protected. And therefore, politically, that has suffered the consequences both from their own internal apparatus. There is a huge amount of discomfort which is being made very public in, you know, the high echelons of the Pentagon. People are going to foreign policy journal with names and what have you, you know, retired generals, admirals, and others saying, I'm not sure this is a good idea. You know, of course the Maduro government should go, but to go to this length and so on. So there is a huge amount of discomfort. There is a huge amount of discomfort among the political class as well. You know, the Senate and the Congress. And the reason why we don't hear too much about Congress, except these 11 senators, which is quite extraordinary in itself already, is because, you know, we are in an election year. So if it does, the amount of risk politically that the United States will take, and if it doesn't work, it's going to be massive, because it's going to be substantially humiliating. It's going to be really bad. So therefore, this is what the strategists are calculating, and they're not sure that they want to go. And the reason why I'm saying this is because they have wanted to invade Venezuela since, you know, for 5-6 years. And the fact that they haven't done it, even though Venezuela has been weakened with hyperinflation, sanctions, and all the rest of it, and they haven't yet done it, is an indication that they know that this is a difficult thing. If on the other hand they don't, and they're doomed as well, it's because if they don't, then obviously Venezuela can relax, and then, you know, can get together with that section of the opposition, normalize the political situation internally, and continue strengthening the links that has internationally. And I don't want to predict too much, but after this pandemic, the economic crisis that is going to ensue is going to be quite serious. And there is no question about it that, you know, the United States is likely to come on top. So therefore, the alliances that Venezuela has built over the last period with Russia, China, and, you know, is very skillful diplomacy with Europe, is beginning to pay off quite substantially. So a full power, you know, full step by the United States, by shooting before thinking, which is typical of Mr. Trump, might backfire very badly. And what is interesting is this, and just to justify my point, when the United States announced that they were going to deploy this fleet, the response by the foreign minister, Jorge Arriaza, I was flabbergasted. He said, well, I'm delighted, he said, that the United States at last is going to actually take care of its own borders, because it never does. And that's the reason why there is so much cocaine in there. And we are delighted that at last they're doing it, and we hope it's successful. And if there is any collaboration that we can lend, please let us know, because we will be delighted to give it. So, you know, it's a clear indication that say, we're not impressed. And of course, if you can, you know, we'll shoot back, as it were. So that would be, at the moment, the answer I have for that.
Okay, thanks. We've had a few emails and comments today about this briefing. And one of the questions that's come in is that you might not have had time to really think about yet, but right. What do you think would be the impact of Bernie Sanders withdrawing from the presidential elections? Do you think that has any effect on the situation?
I think the effect will have is, from what I know from US politics, is they will have the effect of demoralizing that substantial social base and political base that he's been able to build over the last few years. I mean, it's quite substantial, it's quite impressive. It comes to, you know, Latinos, Black people, women, alternatives, young students. I mean, it's quite impressive. From all the indications that actually in the last, not this one, but in the previous primaries, he's apparently won. And, you know, something was done so he didn't. So that base, I'm not sure where is it going to go, because if he withdraws, the chances are, you know, that if he doesn't that his base is not going to continue to be organized, and Joe Biden is going to take advantage out of this. And Joe Biden is, as terrible as all the others, and apart from being pretty incompetent politically. So you can imagine that base is going to go somewhere else. Demoralization will set in, and it's going to be very bad. So if anything, if there is any advice, I don't normally give advice, but if there is any advice I can give to anybody in the United States, is make sure that he stays and make sure that he organizes his base and fights back when and if somebody else wins the primary, because there's going to be an election to fight, and there's going to be views and positions on which to fight the election to make sure that your candidate does as much as possible the right thing. If you withdraw, demoralization will set in, and then you will not be able to fight that fight.
Okay, well, moving on to another issue. You mentioned the IMF decision about not giving a crisis grant to Venezuela. There's been some international pressure to try to persuade them to change their mind. What do you think are the prospects of them being forced to change their decision?
Yeah, it can be done, but it's crucial that the European Union takes us, it's crucial the European Union has a more firm spine. Let me put it bluntly like that. They can sway the committee. They can definitely do. And the United States might still, play, mafioso, but it will be very difficult for them to veto it, although they can still do it because of their weight. My understanding is that the Associated Press report that the IMF had denied it to Venezuela, my information is it was premature. And my understanding is the committee is still discussing it. I don't really know whether they did say no, and then they realized there was a huge backlash, and then they had to pretend that they hadn't finished it, or they hadn't said no, and they're discussing it. What's interesting is this, and it's quite important that people know this. These are not the normal IMF loans. This is a zero interest loan with no conditionality attached to it whatsoever. So the reason why I'm saying this, because I've seen some people, unfortunately on the left, who have been saying that, Maduro is going neoliberal because he's asking for this particular loan. It seems to me that the pressure for the lifting of the sanctions, even though temporarily, which is building up quite dramatically. I mean, Guterres from the United Nations is campaigning more or less daily. Josep Borrell has more or less said twice. So the pressure is building up, and it makes sense that actually the IMF begins to do something about it, because there is no justification on earth. The actual amount of money is designed, set aside precisely for something like this. And any country who requires it should be given it. And to deny to Venezuela would be completely in violation of the same charter and the principles of the IMF itself and the statutes. So that's why I think we should maintain the pressure and keep the pressure up. So the more politicians, the more trade unions, the more celebrities, the more intellectuals, raise their voice and say, give the loan to Venezuela because, help them to fight the pandemic. And the pandemic is better. And there is a self-interest here. If a country, the more countries are able to actually fight successfully the coronavirus pandemic, then the safer would be everybody else. So it is in our interest that they have it.
Yeah, okay. I think, that's something that we've been campaigning for within VSC. So that's just something for everybody to think about, that we've got a petition going, and we'd like everybody, I hope everybody who's watching this evening will sign our petition to help add to that pressure. Just another point that, by the way, that there have been people watching, and we would just like to thank the Scottish Venezuela Solidarity Campaign, Viva Bradford, and a number of other groups who've got in touch with us to kind of
supporting us.
Appreciation for this meeting. Just moving on to just one last brief question. thinking about the sanctions generally, I mean, we've been campaigning for a long time about against the sanctions. How widespread do you think the opposition to sanctions is now? And what are the prospects? Where do you think we might be able to see some change? And what can we do in Britain to support that campaign, to support Venezuela?
Yeah, I mean, the campaign, the ethical view, it's not quite a campaign. Unfortunately, it's not quite a campaign. It should be a campaign. The campaign is being organized by the United Nations, it seems to me. They are campaigning. The European Union is beginning to look like it's campaigning because Joseph Borrell has raised it twice. And the second time he said, I already told you, kind of thing, you know. So this is obviously building up. He is one of the good ones, as it were, within the European Union. There are other characters who are not as friendly. But it's totally clear that, you know, this is building up as a pressure. There is all these world bodies, international bodies, the Economic Commission for Latin America and so on, which is building up. And the trouble is that it is also beginning to build within inside the United States. So Trump and his thugs are very, very much isolated. And as a result of being isolated, they have started to latch out, regardless of whatever it is. And you can see that, you know, they are going all over the place in desperation. And unfortunately, there is no, I don't know, a reasonable interlocutor that could talk to them and say, listen, you know, come to their senses. After all, something can be arranged or something like that to get them out of the hole that they painted themselves in, or a corner they painted themselves in. I think as the pressure continues to build up, and I think Joe Biden has already more or less said something along the lines of, you know, suspending the sanctions. And I think the reason why Joe Biden is saying this is because it is electorally convenient to start saying that within the United States today, because it makes look the United States as a mean, terrible thug. And the last thing they want is that one. And the population faced with the pandemic in the United States itself, with the terrible spectacle of people in the streets lying down dead, you know, not enough hospital, people have to pay for their treatment. The overwhelming sensation that the United States is totally unable to cope, and the size of the number of deaths is unbelievable. So it looks like it's becoming electorally convenient and, you know, beneficial to start saying it. So it seems to me that there is every interest in our sense to do that. Regarding the UK government, we should mobilize churches, parliamentarians, trade unions, and demanding that the UK government stop this nonsense. Demanding the UK government, you know, supports the suspension of sanctions and stop collaborating with these war games, which are extremely dangerous. And the reason why it's extremely dangerous is this. I do not know this, but if things were to start, you know, shooting begins, then God knows who is going to get involved. I mean, there are plenty of information that maybe the Russians, maybe the Chinese, you know, maybe we'll see in their geopolitical interests. The Venezuelans do not want this. They want peace. And they want to have respectful relations with the United States. There is no need for this war if it happens. So it is very important from our point of view to persuade all people with good hearts to actually put pressure on the whoever is in charge in the UK government to stop the nonsense. And, you know, this should be discussed in Parliament as soon as possible, because the more voices are heard, the easier it's going to be for us to tell people like Joe Biden and others within the Democratic Party and even the Republicans to say, what you're doing is not electorally convenient, think again and stop it.
Right. Okay, thank you very much. Right, well, I think we can draw to an end, but I've just got a few closing points to make. I'd like to thank everybody who's been watching, by the way, and also encourage people to join the campaign. You can find us on our website, and I think that should be appearing on the YouTube channel, the details of the links to join us, to join the website, to join the campaign. Also follow us on Twitter. We're Ven Solidarity on Twitter, and we also have a Facebook page. So please, everybody, like our Facebook page and follow us. And very, very importantly, just at the moment, to sign the petition on the IMF refusing to give Venezuela this emergency money. That is really, really important. So please, everybody who's watching could sign that. That would be great. And look out for upcoming campaign pack on the sanctions, which is an ongoing campaign but obviously we're intensifying that issue at the moment. And we will be posting some video clips of this briefing this evening, posting it on Twitter and on Facebook in due course and on the website, so everybody will be able to get some information of what was discussed this evening. Other than that, I think it's time to say thank you, Francisco, and thank you everybody for watching.
Viva Venezuela!
Viva Venezuela!
Thank you.